Dr. John E. Lewis. We need to have more conversations about nutrition. The pharmacy industry, pharmaceutical, big pharma profits off us being ill. Is that really the case? I do talk about that with Dr. John. I'm trying to make a steelman case for that. He was a professor at the University of Miami. He's done clinical research. Now has supplement. Do you know what a polysaccharide is? Is all sugar bad? First question I ask him, and he'll go on to tell you that certainly it's not. There's a difference between many of them, and polysaccharides are very healthy for you. He has a way of, he got them from two particular sources, aloe and rice bran, and the way that he extracts them, why they're necessary, how they help. Just a general conversation on how quick our healthcare institution is so quick to give us drugs, and we get a panel, and we're high on certain things. So take a drug when just simple nutrition and exercise and rest will remedy so much of our issues today. As you all know, I have a story of being very overweight and coming down and continue and strive to get healthier, but it does seem at times the system here in the States specifically is against us. It takes lots of effort, and it's not cheap. It's expensive to eat healthy. And he talks about eating foods that look like their original self. And it's a great conversation with John. He's really smart, and he's really directed. He makes the point of it doesn't make a lot of money to sell a supplement. A long discussion about supplements as well, trying to steel man that argument. But a great conversation with Johnny Lewis. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks for listening.
Hi, I'm Joey Pinz, and here's my 45-second introduction. After starting my business in the 90s, I started developing poor habits of eating in my diet because of working way too much. Before you know it, I found myself 340 pounds. The doctor told me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. Took the next 7 months, lost 130 pounds. People think there's some secret. Ask me, how'd you lose that weight? Like there's some secret. There is no secret. How'd I lose the weight? Just one word: discipline. I've had other successes in life, and I attribute them all to discipline. Now, I'm not the king of discipline, but I believe that it can help all of us. Friends, colleagues convinced me to start a podcast. The podcast mission: how do we better ourselves and society? I talk to interesting people in health, fitness, sport, wellness, business, technology, science, art, and culture. And I eventually ask them how discipline plays a role in their life. Podcast vision: growth through learning from others.
Thank you. I did. Thank you, Dr. John E. Lewis. Thank you so much for your time this morning. I'm very excited to talk to you. Are all sugar bad?
Oh, no way. That's such a bad myth. I get so aggravated when I hear the latest so-called talking head experts say all sugar is bad. So nonsensical. And if when people continue promoting that myth or perpetuating that myth, then it leads to people like me coming along and having to bust that myth. So sugars are dependent on two very important characteristics. One is their source, and two is their biochemical complexity. So my colleagues and I have been studying polysaccharides for a very long time. And if you look at the two roots of that word, poly, many, saccharide, sugar, many sugars, those are very different, especially the ones from aloe vera and rice bran compared to a monosaccharide, mono 1 saccharide sugar that's high fructose corn syrup. That's the simplest form of sugar. And I think we can all agree that if you're sucking down high fructose corn syrup every day in sodas and cookies and cakes and all this other garbage that people tend to eat, then yeah, it's bad for you. I mean, you're going to spike your insulin, you're going to spike your glucose, you're setting yourself up for lots of metabolic problems that not only include type 2 diabetes, but cancer, heart disease, neurodegeneration, you name it. I mean, you got the whole list waiting on you if you continue eating that stuff every day. Then you have disaccharides, Di, 2 saccharide sugar, 2 sugar molecules like sucrose. Again, I would argue that if you're sucking down a lot of table sugar every day, it's probably not your best strategy for health. Finally, you have polysaccharides. Again, these that I mentioned from aloe vera and rice bran, they are, Joe, they're so loaded with information. And remember, what we put into our mouth, every time we open our mouth, bend our elbow, and stick something in it, that is essentially, regardless of whether you like the taste or not, that is coded information. It's like a library of information for our genes to interpret to then instruct our cells how to function.
Hmm.
So again, it doesn't matter to me what you define food for you as, if it's just a means to an end, something that you cannot live without, from an emotional taste perspective or whatever. I find food addiction to be a very fascinating thing, although it's
Yeah.
not my expertise, but I still look at people as food addicts and I'm like, wow, like you really look at food very differently from me. But anyway, these polysaccharides have more information in them than amino acids, fatty acids, certainly vitamins, minerals, elements. Obviously, oxygen is our first nutrient, but we need all these other things in harmony and symphony for our cells to function properly. They require all these things for our cells to function.
Hmm.
And so when you look at all of this information that the genes interpret and then tell our cells how to function, that's very powerful. And so, again, all of this research we've conducted, published in the peer reviewed scientific literature, and shown time and time again how beneficial they are for human health. For me, again, anybody who makes a blanket statement, it's easy. We humans, we love to label things, we love to categorize things. We're very particular that way. But if you are running around the world telling everybody all sugar is bad, you are ignorant and you are wrong.
Mm.
Period.
I think a similar thing happened, I think, in the 70s and 80s when we were kind of pushing to this kind of low fat, where we were told that fat was bad and it got to go low fat and everything. And I think we're finding a little bit of difference there. Now, when we hear the term, John, refined sugar, is that the monosaccharide?
I would say that's typically the mono or the disaccharide,
The
correct?
dye. And I hear things like the American public is addicted to sugar because the fructose is just in everything. I mean, even something like ketchup has almost 75% fructose corn syrup. So when you hear these things, they kind of want to lump it all sugar as bad. But you're here to say that's not the case.
That's exactly right. That's the point I'm making, that you cannot again, it's a blanket statement and it's easy to just generalize things and take things completely out of context. I just want people to understand that, and me particularly as an author, as a scientist, as somebody who's very careful about what I say, very careful the way I use the language, just be mindful of your statement. You cannot say all sugar is bad.
Mm,
Polysaccharides are sugars. They're
mm,
not bad for you. If in fact, they're the opposite. They are highly beneficial for you. So just to say all sugar is bad, again, is at best ignorant, and at worst you're just simply wrong.
mm. So when we fruits are naturally, a lot of them are very sweet. Your mangoes, the pineapples, they're just
Right.
sweet. So they are full of these polysaccharides.
So sugars, or I should say fruits, if you're asking specifically about fruits, they have obviously lots of different sugars in them. So probably, and I'm not an expert on the botanical characterization of every fruit out there, so I'm not going to make any statement that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I would say in general, most fruits have, probably the dominant sugar is fructose, but that is different from high fructose corn syrup.
Mm,
It's been taken from corn and modified biochemically in a way to create this very cheap, inexpensive sweetener to add to sodas and ketchup and cookies and cakes and all this other stuff. And so I would argue that, I mean, there are people out there that are so called fruitarians, for whatever that's worth. I don't know that
hmm.
I necessarily agree with that particular dietary approach or strategy, but I
Fruitarian.
will say that I would never tell anybody not to eat a mango, a banana, a peach, a strawberry, an apple, whatever, simply due to the fact that, yes, that fruit has fructose in it, but yes, it also has vitamins, minerals, fiber,
Yeah.
lots of different phytochemicals that actually have been shown to have very significant health promoting benefits. So to me, I would not put high fructose corn syrup in the same class as a mango or a banana or an
Mhm.
apple or a peach or any other fruit. Totally different animals, so to speak.
And so, where are these polysaccharides naturally found? You mentioned aloe vera and rice bran. Is that typically or a more
Oh yes,
prominent area?
absolutely. I mean, that's true for both of those plants every time. Any I mean, you could just go to here in Miami, we have aloe vera growing in my backyard. I don't go out there every day and snip leaves off and suck the gel down. That's a very poor way to get your polysaccharides from aloe vera. But you have things like mushrooms, all the different mushrooms that have risen in popularity over the last decade or so: lion's mane, shiitake, maitake, reishi, chaga. All those health promoting mushrooms. The reason why they have health promoting qualities is mostly due to their polysaccharide content. Now, I haven't conducted research on those, and I don't go around claiming to be an expert in those types of mushrooms, but I know that they have very significant polysaccharide content. You have different seaweeds that have very significant polysaccharide content. And then, in fact, most vegetables and grains have polysaccharide content. But in the way we've studied them, concentrating them into a powder to have a therapeutic dose where you can actually gain benefit from them, it's likely very difficult, especially in the case of aloe vera. That gel is 98.5, 99% water. You cannot possibly drink or gargle down enough of that polysaccharide content in the gel to ever have any benefit at a dose that wouldn't make you sick. First, number one, it tastes nasty. And number two, you just couldn't possibly suck down enough of that gel to ever get the polysaccharide content for you, which in this case is why a dietary supplement like ours can actually work and can actually be of benefit. But remember too that over the course of especially since the Industrial Revolution, and then really getting ramped up at the so-called Green Revolution era, when we started pumping all of these chemicals into the food production system, our soil has gotten depleted over time. So our plants that are raised compared to 100 today, and especially the last roughly half century, compared to the early 20th century, our soil has been really just knocked down several notches. I mean, we don't have the same quality soil that we used to have 100 years ago. So with all of this industrialization into the farming process, it's continued to create it. While on the one hand, it's created more bulk, on the other hand, it's really punched quality in the gut. And so for those people out there who listen to me talk about our research in polysaccharides, and I don't know that there's that many people. I mean, I occasionally meet somebody who says, "Oh, I get everything I need from food." That doesn't really happen too much anymore. Most people, I think, have finally come around to the idea that our food is not what it was, again, 100 years ago at least. And people recognize that there could be potentially nutritional deficiencies just from trying to get everything you need from diet alone. And so therefore, it is not a bad idea to take a dietary supplement. Now, I would tell you, if you're just eating, or if you're just taking something, I hate to name names, and maybe I shouldn't. I don't. If you don't want me to do that, I won't. But
Please.
Let's say your typical multivitamin and mineral off the shelf at your typical drugstore. That's probably not the best quality type of vitamin and mineral supplement you want to take. I mean, those things have there are a lot of synthetic ingredients. They have excipients and fillers and other additives that, I mean, it's probably not exactly the best thing that your body wants to take, to absorb, to utilize. You probably just end up peeing and pooping most of it out without any real benefit. But if you're taking supplements that come from actual food sources that are natural, that are not loaded with, again, excipients and fillers and all these other things, then those are the kinds of things where, if you look at food as obviously your base, and I'm not suggesting you can supplement your way to good health, you still need to eat well and then use supplement. That's why it's called a supplement. It's not the main, it's the supplement. But you can use those to help fill in the gaps. And again, I would tell anybody who comes to me and says, "Well, I get everything that I need from food." You might be getting all the vitamins and minerals you need, maybe even getting as many amino acids and fatty acids as you need, but you are not getting these polysaccharides because, again, nobody eats aloe vera. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody who's out sucking down aloe vera gel every day. And even if you did, you're not getting it in a concentrated dose. And then when it comes to rice, 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice. That's the white endosperm, the digestible fiber that doesn't have the rice bran. So most of the world prefers to eat white rice. Again, there's nothing wrong with that for a carbohydrate source, but the rice bran is what gives brown rice its color, and that's the real special part of this plant. These two special plants that Mother Nature provides for us to have this, this just incredible health promoting benefit. And so, but it's still, even if you're eating brown rice every day, I mean, I eat quite a bit of brown rice myself. I don't know that I eat it every single day, but I'd say I eat it 4 or 5 days a week.
Wow.
I don't believe I'm getting enough rice bran in that, half a cup serving of brown rice that I eat every day to really have a significant benefit. And also for those of us past middle age and or dealing with a very significant health challenge, based on our research, I would still argue that you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your body's ability to try to heal itself to take these two polysaccharides in a dietary supplement like ours, as opposed to trying to figure it out some other way. And again, I don't subscribe to the notion that, oh, I'm eating well, I don't need supplements today. I mean, even for no other reason, just think of all the pollution in the world. Forget the soil quality issue. That's one issue. But imagine all this pollution we deal with in the world, whether it's radiation exposure. I mean, we're all sitting around, it's either 5G or Wi-Fi or blue screens. I mean, we're just constantly being bombarded with radiation. That creates stress, that creates oxidation, that creates inflammation. All of those things can be, let's say, mitigated. I mean, unless you're living in the middle of, I don't know, Alaska or Montana and you don't have any, cell phone tower and you don't have any Wi-Fi in your home. I mean, maybe if you're living in that kind of a place, then your radiation exposure is a lot less. But still, you have all of this stuff floating around in the atmosphere that, trickles down to us, and all this, again, contamination in our water, our air, our soil. You literally can't avoid it. I mean, the earth is a closed system. It's not, these things don't just escape and then you can live in a bubble somewhere and avoid it. It's a closed system. So we're all exposed to this crap. And unfortunately, there's just no way to avoid it. So I would say taking things, imagining your toolbox, your rhetorical toolbox, that you have tools in there to help you be healthy, avoid chronic inflammation, avoid all this oxidation, avoid all this other physiological cellular stress. Why in the world would you not use something like this? And this is, by the way, to tell you and your listeners, this is not my opinion. This is based on all of our research. This is peer-reviewed, published scientific information. This isn't John up here just on a pulpit giving opinions and talking about things he believes in. No, these are these are based on factual data that my colleagues and I have published. So I'm trying to approach this from a very logical, science-based perspective, not just some talking head giving his opinion that he has no clue what he's talking about.
Yeah, the discussion of supplementation is, I've been taking supplements for a while. I listen to specialists and experts like yourself, and there's a couple of challenges here, John. And the first one is just trying to convince, you don't want to change anybody's mind, but, trying to pose the evidence that supplementation is good, because there's a certain area out there that's just saying, I'll pee it out, it's expensive, it's not worth it, I get like you said, what you eat. And then the second is, okay, I will do it, but the question is, what do I take and how much? And I can go down a whole rabbit's hole. I take about 6 or 7 a day. And the other thing is, people are very used to, like, I got a headache, I take a Tylenol, the headache goes away. It's not the case with supplementation. You feel better, but you don't know if your body fought something off. So it's not kind of immediate. You do feel a little bit better, but then you kind of get used to it. So there's kind of these blockages in the way.
Look, you're correct. I mean, there's no question that people have his or her own perspective and bias and even intuition, if you will, about whether or not something works. The only thing I can tell you, Joe, in response to all that is, number one, please remember that, the dietary supplement industry doesn't really have a lot of regulatory fans when it comes to anybody, certainly big pharma. And then look at how big pharma has this ongoing incestuous relationship with our government. Big pharma spends more money lobbying our government
Huh.
than any other industry. So imagine anything that, in the natural world that comes out. I mean, look at how, even just look at how, and sorry if this is a little tangential, but it is very related to what you just said. Look at how medicine is viewed as the conventional treatment. We
Mm,
call nutrition alternative. That is the biggest bunch of garbage
right.
in the world. Nutrition is the conventional. Anything that you have, whether it's diabetes, cancer, heart disease, neurodegeneration, depression, all these other things that are killing us today, we ought to be looking at why the person ended up in that situation in the first place. What were the behaviors that led that person down a road of getting type 2 diabetes? I can guarantee you 80-90% of the time it's behavior. It has nothing to do with being, oh, I have bad
Mm,
genes. We have this notion too of, oh, well, my genes are bad. No, that's nonsense too. Your genes don't do anything until they receive information from the environment.
hmm,
So I say all that to say that you may have somebody out there that's always trying to poo poo our industry, and you have to be careful about who that person is related to his or her involvement with big pharma.
mm,
I mean, that's a
mm,
very, and I'm sorry, that's not conspiracy theory. That's been shown many times for these pharmaceutical people to go after our industry because they don't like the fact that it may detract from their bottom line.
right, right.
And think about big pharma for a second, too. I mean, do they have revenue if we're all healthy? No. Their entire business model depends on all of us being sick. Otherwise, they don't have revenue. Think about that for a second. If we're healthy, what's the point of having medication? Other than being involved in a car accident, you have trauma, you need to be stabilized, you need to be, given some sedative or steroids or something where you can allow the body to then recover from that type of damage. Sure. I mean, if you're in the United States, when you have trauma, I would say you're probably in the best country in the world to be stabilized and given a great chance to heal from that. But in terms of what we call healthcare in our country, forget it. It's a total disaster. And it's because we're looking at it from the entirely opposite perspective. We do nothing about prevention. I mean, I don't know about you. I went to public school my entire life from first to 12th grade. And this is back in the 70s and 80s. I'm getting old, unfortunately, but
You
I
look
didn't
great.
have I didn't have any information about nutrition in my entire
Right.
12-year experience, other than I remember very clearly in second grade, there was a poster of a cow, and she had this big smile on her face. This was in my homeroom in second grade. And it was basically dairy industry propaganda. I mean, we don't even have to go down the dairy road today, but that whole industry talking about health, you need cow's milk for this and that, that is complete garbage. There are literally thousands of articles published in the scientific peer-reviewed literature completely poo-pooing the dairy industry's message about why we need to drink cow's breast fluid. It's nonsense. We don't need cow's
Hmm,
breast fluid for health. And again, I'm sorry I'm running off on a tangent here, but I'm trying to help you and your listeners understand that all of this incestuous relationships between industry and big pharma and government and big food and big agriculture, and how all of this is not working toward public health. It's actually working toward keeping us sick so that we continue taking drugs, we continue accessing the medical system, which is completely overburdened. And we're all, I mean, look at, I maybe had one or two classmates when I was growing up who was overweight.
hmm.
We were all skinny. We were all thin kids. Today, look at the children around. They're all obese. 30% of them have diabetes. I mean, it is unreal. We had to change adult onset diabetes 20 years ago to type 2 diabetes. It used to be called juvenile onset and adult onset diabetes.
Mm,
Then, when all these kids started getting it, they had to change the name from type 1 diabetes and to type 2 diabetes. I mean, it's
amazing.
incredible what we're doing to ourselves. So I say all that to say that if someone out there is hardcore against dietary supplements and constantly, pounding that they're no good, it's a waste of money, you just excrete it out, blah, blah, blah. I really want to know who's being paid, who is that guy being paid by to say that message, or even better, back up your data, back up your mouth with data. Because I can back up everything, Joe, I'm telling you about polysaccharides with the peer-reviewed publications that my colleagues and I have worked in the trenches. This isn't, me talking about somebody else's work.
Right.
This is me talking about my own work. I mean, this, as you probably can tell already, I'm very passionate about this for the simple fact that I busted my butt for a long, long time running the trials and actually creating a fairly significant body of information that I can now go around the world and talk about and point to these articles and say, again, this is not my opinion. This is based on the research, and there's no conflict of interest. I was running these studies at that time as a professor at the University of Miami without any financial skin in the game. I had there was nothing, no company was paying me to run a study to, create some data set for them so that they could then take that and make a lot of money. No, there was nothing like that. I was getting a salary at the university with nothing else involved. And so I'm very clear. My conscience is very clear about the work that I've done. And I don't have any skeletons in my closet that I'm trying to keep hidden because, oh, wow, if this word gets out, then my credibility is totally shot. I'm totally toast. So I understand skepticism. That's fine. In fact, I've dealt with skepticism my entire career. When we ran the Alzheimer's study, when we were drawing patients from the center where we had this opportunity to run our study, the psychiatrist, the guy who was responsible for the mental health director, the guy who was responsible for helping us get patients into the study, he told Dr. McDaniel and I point blank, my colleague, well, you guys have some money. We have a lot of patients, and we have mostly, everything we do here is related to drugs. We don't really think nutrition will do anything, but you guys have some money. We have patients. We're happy to collaborate. And Dr. McDaniel looked at each other like, what? Like, how in the world can you be so closed-minded and so skeptical? And even that guy had to admit, as we started running the trial, well, if I hadn't seen these patients myself, I don't know that I would have believed the changes that are going on here. So, I've even had other colleagues in my own department at the university tell me, well, John, you do all of this, nutrition work. I mean, what are you doing? Why aren't you working in drugs? Why aren't you like everybody else running drug trials? Why are you doing this nutrition nonsense? So I'm very well versed in dealing with skepticism and having it right in my face in a very blunt manner. But I would just tell anybody out there, buying a dietary supplement, although it's not the same financial commitment as buying a car, let's say, but for the most part, when you make any kind of, let's call it big consumer decision, I think most rational people do a little bit of homework, right? I mean, I don't think most people just drive by the Chrysler dealership and say, I'm going to run in here and buy a Dodge truck today. You'd probably compare Dodge to Ford to Toyota and then say, okay, this is the best truck for me. You wouldn't just pass by the dealership one day and just on a whim say that's the one you're buying. Same thing with dietary supplements. It may not be as easy to go to Consumer Reports or some other third-party organization that does that type of evaluation to look at reviews and recalls and all these sorts of things. But in this day and age of information, it is relatively easy to do some background checking on different companies. And I think, for the most part, retailers like Whole Foods and Vitamin Shop and, even Amazon, of course. I mean, people that, are selling where people are selling things in different retailers, it's fairly easy to look at reviews and whatnot. And then even take it one step further. I mean, go to a company's website like mine and look and see if actually the people running the company have been involved in research. I mean, if you can find that level of credibility, I think you're pretty much onto something. I worked with some of those companies before I left academics. Life Extension here in Fort Lauderdale, Standard Process in Wisconsin, Premier Research Labs, Biotics. I mean, I worked with some really good companies. These are people that are putting money behind their products to say, here, we want to run a clinical trial to see if this product actually does what we think it does. So there are companies out there that are putting their money where their mouth is to say, we want to evaluate a certain nutrient, phytonutrient, whatever, and we want to see what the results are. So I think just do your homework. I mean, again, don't take my word for it. Fact check what I'm saying. Go to pubmed.gov. PubMed is the National Library of Medicine. That's the branch of the NIH, which obviously NIH has taken a pretty big credibility hit. But I think when it comes to the National Library of Medicine, you go to pubmed.gov, do your own literature search. Any journal worth its weight in salt is going to be indexed by PubMed. And then there you can find the information, that's been published. I mean, there are literally millions of articles on PubMed that are indexed that you can search for. So again, it's relatively easy today. I mean, of course, there's always going to be some unethical person. I mean, I even have a company knocking off my flagship product right now. We don't have to talk about that, but there are unethical. There are always going to be unethical people out there that do bad things. Period. Unfortunately, the dietary supplement industry is already operating under a level of, just like you were saying earlier, skepticism, or why do I need this, or oh, this is a waste of money, or whatever. We're already like used car salesmen almost in that sense. But there are very good companies out there. I just mentioned a few of them, and mine too. And we are doing it the right way. We are helping people with products that actually work. And listen, if I was trying to just be wealthy or make a lot of money, man, I was very stupid about it, because I spent 20 years of my life in academics where only, the dean of the medical school and the provost and the president of the university and those kinds of, really upper crust bureaucrats make the high 6-figure, low 7-figure salaries. Grunts like me, professors like me running research trials, especially somebody in nutrition and supplementation, I didn't do anything in drugs. I think I was involved in one or two study with a drug tangentially. They weren't my studies, but I was, tangentially involved. But those of us doing the kind of work that I was doing full time in academics, I mean, we're not there to become wealthy. That's not even, that's the worst place. The academic environment is the worst place in the world to think you're going to become wealthy. Again, unless your means, or not your means, your desire is again to become the president of a university. Those people again make a lot of money, but the typical professor like me, you're not you're not there to become wealthy. So this was never anything about me looking to become some millionaire based on making deals with big pharma behind the scenes and then riding off into the sunset on my boat. This was me always having my entire life. I've had an interest starting out actually in sports, playing sports as a kid, getting into drug-free bodybuilding in college, and then kind of shifting from an exercise focus to more of a nutrition focus. And then meeting a couple of people who turned me on to the polysaccharides that completely changed my life. I mean, it's been an interesting journey, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have done what I've done for the last 20 years. But had I not met Dr. Reg McDaniel, who shared with me his experience with aloe vera, and then Barbara Kimley, a patient at the Cancer Center at the University of Miami, who shared her story with me about rice bran. I mean, Joe, I wouldn't even be sitting here talking to you today if it wasn't for those two people.
John, let's steel man the argument of pharma only profiting off sick people. What would they say?
Well, I mean, if they're a public company, their first responsibility is fiduciary, right? They have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, and every company of any company I've ever looked into, it's always about everything is a profit motive. I mean, that's basically just the legalities of a publicly traded company that has a fiduciary responsibility to do everything in their power to make money for the shareholders. That's it. I mean, there's nothing else to be said. So again, if they don't have a population of sick people, how are they going to make money with their products?
But
Their
they would
only
say that they have drugs that do help people, where you said we're best in trauma, that there are some drugs that actually do help, right? That are essential, that we do need.
I mean, again, that's comparing trauma situations to all of us dying from heart disease, cancer, diabetes, neurodegeneration. Man, that trauma share of the pie is like this, and then you've got everything else like that. How
So
many
you
people?
don't believe they're mostly bad. You don't believe they're that their argument would be what if we were talking to someone. By the way, this, I'm not paid by farm. I just want to kind of steel man this, and the system has to change, right? Because these companies can't profit on being sick. But I'm sure, and I've seen interviews with the CEO of some of these companies, and they'll go on to say that we helped COVID, and we helped. They're going to go back to the 40s and 50s where they helped the plague, and they helped all these illnesses are now gone because of drugs, right? AIDS, for example, and or HIV. So what's their argument? You can't come up with one.
Their argument is,
Polio. All these things are gone now because of great drugs, right?
well, that's a very, I mean, if you're going down the vaccine road, that's
That's a good
kind of,
point.
yeah, that's a subset of drugs, right? I mean, that's not taking a statin, which I don't even know, like there are literally maybe 1 billion people around the world taking a statin. I mean, it's an unreal
Hmm.
amount of people taking statins. I don't know what the percentage is exactly. It's got to be at least hundreds of millions, if not 1 billion people around the world on a statin. So imagine that for a second. You've been living your life eating this junky food, not exercising, not taking care of yourself, and then you roll into your physician's office one day and you get your blood work taken, and now you come back and it's got, elevated total cholesterol, elevated LDL cholesterol, and the physician says, "Well, sir, you need to take a statin." And then 9 times out of 10, because of that, that white coat and that authority and that figure, what does the patient do? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. And runs right to CVS or Walgreens and grabs that prescription. So there was not probably even 30 seconds spent talking to that patient about why, Mr. Smith, are you here in the first place?
Hmm.
Did you undress any of those behaviors of the last 10, 20, 30, how many ever years that got you to that place in the first place? This is the major problem that we have in our medical system today. I'm not a physician, but I've been in the medical school environment for so many years. I have tons of friends who are physicians, and I know that there are very few. I just mentioned Dr. McDaniel, his name by name, but there are very few of them like him who escaped out of the Matrix, because that's basically what it is. It's just exactly like the Matrix movie. Dr. Reg was able to pull himself out of the Matrix, and this is 40 years ago. I mean, this wasn't
Hmm.
yesterday. He's been around a long time, but he pulled himself out of the Matrix because and you mentioned HIV. It's funny you mentioned that. He actually got into this polysaccharide research because of 10 guys that had HIV at that time, back in 1985, 86, almost 40 years ago. They were taking this aloe vera product. They had no viral load of the virus, and their CD4 cells were normal. This was
Wow.
way before antiretroviral medication. And they were showing him this aloe product, and Reg was like, "Well, I'm a pathologist. I'm running a pathology unit here at a hospital in the Dallas area. I'm just running my fax machine every day, running my tissues, and I don't really care about nutrition." I mean, that literally was him.
Wow.
And he kept shooing these guys out of the office. He basically thought he was being pranked. But fortunately for all of us, they would not take no for an answer, and it completely changed Dr. McDaniel's life. he ended up looking at this product with his colleagues at Texas A&M at the vet school. He couldn't get any of his physician friends interested, but his veterinary friends were interested. And so they ended up going down a path of discovery, looking at why these polysaccharides could not only knock out things like HIV, but all sorts of other viruses, cancers. They did all sorts of work, mostly in animals. And anyway, he stopped practicing pathology and basically started practicing nutrition. Now, that's just one man's story, but I'm saying all that to say that, again, when you hear something about the vaccine, the polio vaccine knocking out polio, actually, there's an alternative argument to that at the same time that vaccine was being introduced, polio was already on the way out, and it was on the way out because of hygiene and contamination in our water that no longer existed. And so it was much more about focusing on hygiene and clean drinking water than it was on some vaccine. And so if you're asking me to give Big Pharma's argument about why they're needed, I would again go back to what I said is, yeah, you're needed for trauma, and yeah, you're needed for extreme cases of, I don't know, maybe pain or something that is just very, very difficult. Maybe even children that are unfortunately born with genetic anomalies. Marfan syndrome, Down syndrome, these kinds of things. I don't know. And I've never had anyone in my family with anything like that. And I don't know what a drug may do in a situation like that. If anything, maybe somehow help to manage symptoms. But the reality is that go back to before Big Pharma became something which actually can be attributed to John Rockefeller,
Right.
Going back to when he saw that medications could be created from different petroleum derivatives. And so he chose to fund a group of people. It was called the Flexner Report back in, I think, 1913 or something. So before that, actually, physicians used a lot of natural remedies in their toolbox. And then when the Flexner Report came out, just completely crushing all the natural stuff, it was basically the rise in medications. So we can actually owe it to that evil piece of what for where we are today. He really started all this, and I hope he's suffering eternally for what he's done to us, because now we have such an incredible inertia against all this. And again, even going back to one earlier point that I made, how in the world do we call nutrition alternative and medicine conventional? That is just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
There's nothing about medicine that's a convention. Again, and depending on your faith and what you think of where humanity came from, we've been around for a very long time. At no point in our evolution, in our journey as a species, did we need a statin, a hypertension medication, Ozempic. My goodness, you can't turn on the news anymore today about just all these different opinions about Ozempic. And I was hearing RFK talk about it yesterday. In fact, I posted it on my LinkedIn profile. He was talking about how 100 members of Congress have signed on because of getting funding from Novo Nordisk, this company in the Netherlands that's now the richest company in the EU, just because of this one drug.
Right.
And these 100 Congress people, men and women, have taken money from Novo Nordisk to now make it a part of the Medicare process, where it gets paid, reimbursed by Medicare, and starting with children at, I think he said, 6 years of age, potentially. So you're going to take this injection for is it a monthly treatment? I'm not even that familiar with the exact protocol of it. I think it's a monthly injection or something. Putting people on this monthly injection for the rest of their lives, getting Medicare to pay for it, which essentially means our tax money to pay for obesity that is not, again, even remotely considered. Why in the world this person is sitting there overweight or obese in the first place? Let's get to the fundamentals of what we stick in our mouth and how we move, and then taking personal responsibility for that, and then moving forward and trying to address all this incestuousness between industry and government, and getting all of that lobbying and all of that subsidy money out of the system, so that we can actually return to having whole food as a foundation of our lives, and not all of this crap that people are shoveling down their throats.
Yeah, and I think conversations like this help, John. And I hear you say often, eat things that the way they look.
Right.
Yeah. So we need supplementation. How do we decide what we want? You mentioned the car analogy of doing a little research. I mean, the problem that I hear from my friends are, well, I was taking supplements for a year, didn't I felt the same, so I'm going to stop.
Okay.
So I don't know, and I hear other supplements, brands are better. You mentioned one at a drugstore where it's got fillers and everything, and how do we decide what we need?
So this is a great question. So we'll not talk about polysaccharides. Let's talk about one very important vitamin that 70% of Americans are either
Mm,
insufficient or deficient in it, and that is vitamin D.
you need D. Yeah.
So vitamin D is hugely important. And for those of us not living in Florida or the Sun Belt part of our country, if you're living, in the northern latitudes, even all the way to Alaska or whatever, you're not getting as much sun as the rest of us. So you can't just run outside for 15 or 20 minutes every day and get your UVB radiation and then have your body convert that into what it needs. And so vitamin D3, I would recommend 3 as an example, as opposed to D2. D3 is a better absorbed source of it, but it's also, Joe, a very cheap test. I mean, you can just do like a little finger prick, get a little drop of blood. I think even Life Extension now offers you request the kit from them, and then you just do a little finger prick, put the blood on that little assay kit, and then send it off to them, and you can get tested. So all of these people out there that are deficient or insufficient in their vitamin D status, what does that mean? Well, it's a lot of people, I'm sure, still think vitamin D is mostly for your bones, and that's certainly true. But what the science is evolving to show us, we have 30,000, 40,000 genes. I don't know that number is exactly defined, but we now know that vitamin D interacts with over 4,500 of our genes. It's an incredibly important nutrient. And if you're sitting around in your house all day, or if you're the kind of person who is so terrified of the sunshine every time you go to the beach or the lake or wherever, and you just completely cover yourself in clothing and sunscreen, well, you're totally blocking the
Mm,
sun's natural benefit to you. And so you are having not only an impact on your bone health, but literally from head to toe. So you need to be aware of the importance and the significance of vitamin D, not just for your bones, but literally for every organ system in your body. And so it's easy to test it. It's easy to take any kind, and it's relatively inexpensive. Vitamin D products are typically not,
no,
very
they're
costly.
expensive,
You
right?
take your 4,000, 3,000, 4,000 units per day after you've had your test, find out what your level is, and then start taking it, and then retest yourself in a few months, say 6 months down the road, retest, and then see what your level is. I mean,
Mm,
that to me is the easiest way to determine whether something like vitamin D is working for, or a particular vitamin D product is working for you. So to me, that's a no brainer, no pun intended. I would definitely encourage all of your listeners to pay very close attention to your vitamin D level. Now, there's definitely an argument about once you get up over, say, 50 or 60, then it becomes like, okay, well, what's optimal? Like, it's one thing just to prevent having osteoporosis and not having detrimental effects of a low level, but what's optimal? That's where it's kind of vague and there's a bit of disagreement. But we do know that if you're continuously below 30 or 20, man, you're really setting yourself up for a lot of problems,
mm.
especially as you age. So I try to keep mine somewhere between 50 and 60. I get mine tested every year, and it's usually in that 50 to 60 range. So I feel like I'm pretty good there. I've got a friend, he's a pharmacist. He thinks it should be over 100. So he's like
Mm.
he's like a vitamin D fanatic. He's sucking down big quantities. I have no idea. I mean, he's going to end up just being, basically an experiment of one. I don't know too many people that are into having it at that high of a level. Is that too good of a good thing? I don't know. I can't answer
Mm.
the question, but I would say that you at least want to get up into the 50 to 60 range. And then if it gets higher than that, I mean, it's probably not a bad thing, but again, I'm kind of speaking out of turn there. So, but vitamin D, to answer your question, I mean, just
Start
again,
there.
Go to a brand that you think you can trust. Go to a brand that you think you like. Check your level. Start taking that product, and then over a few months period, retest it and see what your next result is, and then compare the two.
Yeah, and then make slow changes that way. I was
Right.
convinced years ago to take quercetin.
Okay.
Are you familiar?
Of course. Absolutely.
And again, it's just I think as Americans we want quick gratification. I mean, I generally don't get sick very often, and I don't know what's happening there. But it's not expensive, and it's only an extra. It's not like it's. I don't know. What do I pay for all my supplements? I probably pay $300 or $400 a year. It's not that expensive, and
Right.
combine that with some exercise, like you said. Now, you've been eating a plant-based diet, I believe, for like 25 years. Talk to me about
27,
the
actually.
27. Talk to me
Yes.
about that decision.
So that was an interesting decision almost 28 years ago when as I got into bodybuilding, and this is maybe about 5, 6 years before I went plant-based, maybe 10 years. I'd have to think about the math for a second. But at that point, I thought as a bodybuilder, I was eating pretty healthy. I still ate a lot. I'd pretty much given up red meat at that point in my life anyway. Every time I ate any kind of beef product, I felt heavy. It just didn't resonate with me very well. It made me not feel well. I didn't really understand what was going on because I was not at a level of my journey yet in terms of my education and knowledge and what I really understood was happening to me. But nonetheless, I just intuitively decided, you know what, red meat, I'd eaten red meat. My dad, in fact, just to kind of give a little more context, I grew up in a family who ate for taste. We did not eat for health. And my dad thought a meal had to have three basic components: a glass of milk, a piece of bread, and a piece of some kind of meat. It didn't really
Wow.
matter, what the beef, if it was roast or hamburger or whatever, steak. But generally, that's what we had pretty much at every meal. He could have all kinds of other fruits and vegetables and grains, but he really needed those three components to feel like he had a meal, especially at dinner. Maybe not so much at breakfast or lunch, but excuse me. Anyway, that was the kind of family I grew up in, and I didn't have any model of, health and wellness. I had no one in my family who we just lived. We were just basic people, just living our lives, working, going to school, whatever, not really paying attention to how we ate other than just that we wanted it to taste good. And so when I got into bodybuilding, I mean, if nothing else, bodybuilding shifted my focus about food to say that I'm trying to achieve something very specific here, and I want to utilize nutrition and even some supplementation at that time to my advantage. And I was drug free. I never took any steroids, growth hormone, none of that stuff. I was not willing to take the risk later in life of what those drugs could do to me. That, for me as a bodybuilder, I didn't think I was going to become like wealthy or make a living or famous or anything else. I mean, I didn't have any delusions of grandeur like that. So, but if for no other reason, it got me again into a very specific framework or mindset of how you utilize nutrition. And so again, I'm eating what I think is pretty healthy. But then I start reflecting back on my life in terms of all these throat infections I had, especially as a kid. I kind of grew out of them in my adulthood, but I still had this lingering sort of throat issue. And then one day, a friend of mine sent me a website, and it was called notmilk.com.
Hmm.
And I think it's still active. Robert Cohen is the guy who started it. He used to have a daily listserv. He quit that a few years ago. But I went to notmilk.com. And again, Joe, this is nearly 30 years ago. I mean, this wasn't yesterday. And of course, this is very, the internet's still very new at that point. But Cohen had already assembled all of this information about, and I hammered dairy a little while ago just for a minute, but he had such an amazing collection of information. Again, peer-reviewed literature, not his opinion, but he had referenced all of these articles that were published about all these different consequences of consuming cow's milk. And I started reading them, and so many of those things related to infections and even gut function. I mean, not to be too overly personal here, but let's say that prior to eliminating dairy, I thought constipation was a normal thing.
Hmm.
Literally. I mean, that was my entire life. Bowel movements, constipation, go to the toilet, sit there for 30 or 45 minutes. Like that was a
Whoa.
normal thing. When I eliminated dairy, after reading Cohen's website, and it didn't take me long. I mean, this was, for me, this was, as psychologists say, one of those teachable moments. I mean, this information like really resonated and hit me in the face. And I said, okay, I'm done with dairy. I mean, I didn't go just like that. I took baby steps on my journey to going completely plant-based, but dairy was the first one for me that just like was such an eye opener. And I had never heard any of this information. All I was ever exposed to was that silly poster from second grade in homeroom. And then, of course, all these TV commercials you used to see, Got Milk, The Mustache, Nature's Perfect Food, all this phony baloney, celebrities with their mustache and whatnot. And so I was like everybody else. And I had to pull myself out of the matrix to say, wait a minute, is what the dairy industry telling me actually the truth? Or is this just, basically, I don't want to say a myth, but just basically behavior that's been perpetuated because at some point humans were starving and they needed some source of nutrition. And so they said, well, wait a minute, we used to, feed off of our mother's boob. Let's feed off of a cow's boob, essentially,
Hmm.
something along those lines. I don't know what group of humans ultimately can be attributed to starting to use cow's milk initially, but where is the basis for that other than just for pure survival? It doesn't have anything to do with optimizing health. And so, again, for me, that was like my first step. I eliminated dairy, and literally within a week, my bowel movement completely
Wow.
changed.
Wow.
You want to talk about doing a behavior or changing a behavior where you can notice a difference? Wow, for me, like that
Hmm.
was like such an eye opener. I mean, I had a completely, and to this day, after now 27 years of not eating dairy, I mean, it may have slipped in here or there when I didn't know it, when somebody gave me something that I
Cheese,
didn't.
ice cream. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, not like that. It would be something more subtle, like maybe slipping in some butter into a pasta sauce or a soup
I
or something.
see. I
But I
see.
would never like consciously eat.
Right.
If I knew it, I wouldn't consciously eat it. It would have just been slipped in that I wouldn't have known. But that's, probably I couldn't even count those occurrences on both hands over that last 27 years. But talk about a huge difference in the way my gut functioned once I eliminated all that dairy. I mean, oh my gosh, like night and day. And then it just led to one decision after another. I mean, the last thing I think I gave up was probably I don't even remember now. It was probably either eggs. And at that time, I was eating a little bit of fish. Those were probably the last two. But after that, dairy, then I gave up. Again, as I mentioned, I was already down to eating red meat maybe twice a year anyway. So that was easy. I
Hmm.
just didn't eat it in those two occasions anymore. And then probably chicken. Never was really a big pork eater. I never ate pork. Seafood growing up in Tennessee, didn't really have much of an interest in
Hmm.
seafood, but I did
Hmm.
eat as a bodybuilder. It was very convenient to carry around cans of tuna. And so I'd, kind of eaten quite a bit of tuna over the years, but that was also pretty easy to give up because I didn't really ever like the taste of it. It was just more of something convenient to eat that I could carry in a can. And so really after that, it was eggs that I didn't eat any every day anyway. I just would occasionally have eggs as, something different from my smoothie or my oatmeal. So actually for me, excuse me, I think probably over about a 6 month period, it took me to like completely go down the plant-based decision. But I mean, I'm as healthy as anybody I know at my age. I'm as strong as anybody I know. I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, but I mean, I consider my health status to be right there with not just people my own age, but actually people far younger than me. I mean,
Hmm.
I can outwork and outperform just about anybody 10, 20, 30 years younger than me. No problem. And so I'm an N of one, obviously. I can't totally project or translate that to the entire population, but people that try to pass off this other myth about you can only get the essential amino acids from animal tissue, that's completely baloney.
Hmm.
You can only get the essential omega-3 fatty acid from fish oil. That's total baloney. I mean, all of those essential nutrients actually come from plants first. No animal can synthesize an omega-3 fatty acid. No fish can do that. No mammal can synthesize the essential amino acids. Those all have to come from plants first.
Interesting.
So there are just so many myths that get perpetuated. And for me, I go back to one of the things my professor in graduate school, one of my professors in graduate school told me, who happened to be involved in the creation of Gatorade. I'll never forget Dr. Welch, because he talked about the story of how Gatorade came into being. When they were running the initial tests on that formulation at the University of Florida, that's why it's called Gatorade.
Right.
Gators, Florida Gators. They were using a formula that they were testing on the football players, and they were giving them this stuff, as they were going through practice and whatnot. And so when you're dehydrated and you're exhausted and your body temperature is elevated, the body shuts down your sense of taste, because the body wants you to just hydrate. And you could probably drink your own pee when you're that dehydrated and not even taste it to the same degree as you would when you're at resting state. So they were giving these guys this formulation of these electrolytes that tasted like garbage. But that was the original formula that they had tested on, that they had showed that it helped to replenish your electrolyte status. When they took that formula to market, guess what happened? Nobody would buy it. It tasted like garbage. So they had to change the Gatorade formula into something with sugar and sweetener and flavor and all this other stuff that consumers would actually purchase. But it was not the original formula that they had tested that showed that it actually worked. And so he said, marketing is always up here, and you can't see it on the screen, but I'll just show, science is down below my knee. And I'll never forget Dr. Welch's anecdote and him personally being involved in the initial research on what now is called Gatorade. And of course, it went from sucrose to now, as you mentioned earlier, high fructose corn syrup. And so it's been completely bastardized. I actually picked up one not too long ago. It was one of the colored ones. I looked at the label and it had blue 40 in it and all this other crap that other countries around the world don't even allow to be put in their food. And here we are giving this, and then we're marketing it to our children and our teenagers. You're on the field and you're playing and you need it. It's garbage. Just drink your water. And if you don't like the taste of plain water, splash a little bit of lemon or lime in it. I mean, stop drinking all these so-called sports energy drinks that are loaded with all these chemicals and all these additives that have absolutely no health promoting benefits to you. But anyway, I'm sorry if that's a very long-winded answer to say that my journey to being plant-based was very systematic, like most everything I've ever done in my life. And it was not a casual decision. It was based on not only reading the science and the literature, again, starting with dairy, but then also how it made me feel. And then also taking it a step further and looking at all this other information that's been published about the negative effects of eating animal tissue. And then also comparing that to how I'd felt as a kid when I was eating all this animal food. And so again, I'm an N of one. I'm not saying this projects to every other person in the world, but I'm just telling you, if I can change based on my own family's journey and history and my parents and grandparents and how they fed me and, what we considered as normal, to where I became my own sort of, person escaping from the matrix to say, wait a minute, does all this make sense? And don't get me wrong, at the end of the day, I still want to eat a meal that tastes good. I mean, I love the way my smoothies taste. I love preparing my own food and whatnot. But at the end of the day, all of that information is coded information that our genes interpret to tell the cells how to function. And that either works to our advantage or to our disadvantage. It's your choice. We still fortunately live in a free society. Hopefully we always will. We're not being forced fed anything, but make your own decision about, how this all affects you. And ultimately, this is our personal responsibility. I mean, that's one of the things that really annoys and aggravates me about the typical person's approach to his or her health is that, they're just kind of going through life in the ether. They're not even considering some of these issues that you and I are talking about today. They're just taking everything for granted and, going along, and they get hungry. So they drive through their preferred fast food place, or even just the most convenient one. It may not even be their preferred one, but they just, suck down a bunch of calories and keep going. And they don't even consider for a moment what all of that information that they just loaded their system with is actually doing to their system and how that is so important. I mean, how many people do you know? I cook for my family practically every day, unless I'm sick or traveling. I cook a meal for us every single day. I actually enjoy, I'm maybe a unicorn, but I actually enjoy going to the grocery store. I enjoy buying my own food, knowing what I'm bringing home. And I actually enjoy the process of creating a meal that I know is nutritious for me and my family that we can all benefit from, not just because we enjoy the taste of it, but because it actually helps and allows our cells to function properly. And every 30 plus trillion cells in our body require good nutrition for us to then all the way up to this whole thing we call a body to function properly, and hopefully not just function properly, but actually be optimal and enjoy a good quality of life. And to me, it all starts fundamentally with nutrition.
I enjoy shopping and cooking for my family as well. But red meat, I mean, the studies that have come out about red meat in the last 4 or 5 years have been a big change to what we've seen 20 or 30 years ago. Is it possible that red meat's been villainized almost like sugar?
You know, again, this is obviously a difficult topic for a lot of people. And I looked at beef as just food, back again when I was a kid, going up into my early 20s, mid 20s, and not questioning anything about it. It depends. I mean, you hear people that are talking about beef being villainized, and I don't know what their motive is per se. I mean, some of these people involved in the carnivore movement, clearly that's what they believe. They think that humans are only supposed to eat beef. I guess villainized, I don't know if I'd go to that point. I mean, if anything, I think it's been the opposite. If you look at it from a funding perspective of how the beef industry has been working with USDA, not so much maybe FDA, but definitely USDA, and the subsidies that the beef industry actually gets from our government. I mean, one of the things that has been very profound to me is looking at all the subsidies, and I learned a lot of this from Cohen, among a few other people, but the dairy industry, the beef industry, the poultry industry, all these big animal producers get tons of money from the government to make those commodities cheaper for the consumer. So if you actually took all of that money out of the system, a gallon of milk would be like 10 times what it is. A piece of a steak would be, X number of times of what it is. What does that have to do with health? Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm just telling you that based on some of the research that I've read, and I don't like to pretend or claim to know everything there is to know about nutrition, Joe. I don't think that's being genuine because nutritional science is such a large field that I believe it's impossible, even if you're the smartest person walking on the planet today, I think it's almost impossible to know everything about everything in nutrition. So I really don't know that beef has been villainized per se. What I'm referring to is looking at, let's take, for example, blue zones.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the blue zone? So you have
areas in the world that people are living long lives.
That's right. So you have, I don't know all of them, but I know Sardinia in Italy,
Yep.
Okinawa, Japan, Loma Linda in California. And I forget, I think there are 3 or 4, there are like 6 or 7 of them.
Yeah.
But one of the things that the blue zone has in common, or all the blue zones have in common, is that they are people eating mostly plant-based diets. They are not people gorging themselves on beef, pork, chicken every day, eggs, dairy, whatever. They are mostly eating a plant-based diet. And there are some very good studies showing that people eating higher levels, and again, maybe if you're only eating, say, I don't know, 1 hamburger a week or something, maybe you're okay there. But there are some very good studies showing mechanistically, and I'm not talking specifically about these large epidemiological studies that show relationships over time. I know those get criticized, voraciously, especially by the carnivore crowd, because they say, oh, well, there's all this error involved, and people are maybe not accurately answering questions on the questionnaires, blah, blah, blah. But if you look at some of the mechanisms, especially related to, now, if you're eating kafta, I know Lebanese people eat this raw beef kafta dish that I find pretty gross, but if you're eating raw beef, maybe this is not the same level of risk. But when you eat beef that's been cooked at a very high level, then you are turning a lot of those fatty acids into that beef into very carcinogenic materials, polycyclic heteroamines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These things, Joe, are very akin to the carcinogens that you get when you smoke cigarettes. And so ultimately, what those things do is that they create adducts in our genetic structure. And those adducts lead to let's call it flawed cellular replication, that ultimately over time, when you have flawed replication like that, it leads you down a road potentially of cancer. I'm not saying that is necessarily going to cause you to have cancer, but when you look at some of those very specific mechanisms of what eating those kinds of materials that you get from meat do to your cellular structure, and then you go back to that position stand that the WHO took back in 2015, and I don't know what you think about the WHO at this point. I don't think it has a whole lot of credibility. I wish the United States would withdraw from it, actually. But this was all prior to this COVID craziness and all this other, sort of global tyranny that we're potentially living under now. But prior to that, there were 800 studies that this group of people related to, having some position or affiliation with the WHO came out with this position stand that basically said red meat and processed meat were probably or likely carcinogenic, particularly for colorectal cancer. And so and that was based on 800 studies at that time. So that was nearly 10 years ago. And so all of these different mechanisms and again, if you're eating raw meat, maybe you have nothing to worry about. But when you cook that stuff at a very high temperature, and I know a lot of people love their grilling and their barbecuing and their searing and all that stuff, where you really have to cook that stuff at, 350, 400, 450 degrees. That's where you're creating all these carcinogenic chemicals that ultimately can drive your risk of cancer. Now, again, if you're only doing this once a week, once a month, very infrequently, maybe your risk is not that great. But if that's the type of food you're eating every single day, I would highly encourage you to, again, don't take my word for it. This is all on PubMed. Go to PubMed, do your own literature search, and then you decide for yourself if that's the right thing to do. And I decided, again, a long time ago, I didn't want to continue doing this to myself.
Yeah, I follow Dr. Andrew Huberman, who has cited lots of studies recently about that, and it's very, very different. I wonder, like you said, you need to do your own research on it. John, what motivates you right now?
What motivates me, Joe, is to spread my information about the benefits of polysaccharides. And if you are a carnivore, that's your own decision. I'm not here to try to change your mind.
Right.
But don't be so closed-minded to say that, oh my gosh, those materials come from aloe vera and rice bran. I just cannot possibly incorporate those into my life. That is so silly to me. Mm-hmm. That is so close-minded to me that you are losing out on an opportunity to benefit from these particular compounds that Mother Nature provides for us that can have such dramatic impacts on your health. And that, again, is not my opinion. That is based on not just our research from the University of Miami. That's from many scientists and institutions all over the world. So what motivates me, again, is to help people learn and know about these polysaccharides and how beneficial they can be. Because, man, I've seen it, and not just in my research, but so many individuals. I mean, you can go to our website and look at all the testimonials we've got, all the product reviews. I mean, I get them all the time, and I keep telling people, would you please put that on our website? Because this kind of response needs to be spread to the world. But that is my motivation. It's not about becoming wealthy or rich. It's about the passion and the obsession that I have for helping people get healthy. And you can do this so easily with this one simple behavior. You were kind of setting it up as the sort of the skeptical viewpoint of taking dietary supplements a moment ago, which doesn't bother me. But let's put it in a little bit of a different light. So compare taking a dietary supplement to two other things: changing your diet and exercising. Now, you know full well that if somebody is dealing with diabetes or cancer or heart disease, and you say, well, you know what, Mr. Smith, it's time for you to do this or that, you've got a person, hopefully at that moment, who's very motivated to make change. So that's the kind of person who probably is saying to him or herself, oh my gosh, I got to do something about this right now or I'm dead. So that's the motivation that you need. Unfortunately, most people, if they haven't gotten that kind of diagnosis, they're not that to that level. But that's the kind of behavior that people need to change. And so imagine making a wholesale shift in your approach to food. So instead of going to Taco Bell or McDonald's and Burger King and KFC and all these other places every day, now you're grocery shopping and making your own food. Imagine all of the effort that requires to wrap that person's mind around all that to make that change.
Mm.
Simultaneously, that same person is probably a couch potato, right? He hasn't seen a gym or anything else maybe since high school, and now here he is 40, 50 years later. He's been working in a very sedentary job. He comes home, he sits on the couch till he goes to bed or till he eats dinner, and then he goes to bed and barely moved a muscle. Imagine getting that person to sign up for a gym membership at LA Fitness and buy his equipment and his shoes and all these other things, and then get into it. So I'm giving you a context around those two behaviors: dietary change and physical activity and exercise, compared to simply taking a dietary supplement. Most Americans are already taking a medication anyway, or like
Right.
you and me are already taking supplements. It's not like it's such a big deal to get somebody to say, here, take this capsule, or here, take this powder. So I say all of that to say that, in terms of my work, again, if people want to talk about nutrition and exercise like you and I have today, I'm all for it and I'm happy to do it. We've actually barely scratched the surface on exercise, but
Right.
pairing those kinds of behavior changes to just, again, incorporating a dietary supplement change into your routine, I mean, to me, they're like no brainers. And that's why
Mm.
we were able to, in terms of being researchers, I was actually much happier to run a study that involved just simply giving somebody a dietary supplement, as opposed to expecting people to come into our center and actually exercise them 3 or 4 days a week, or put them on a diet, or all these other very sophisticated, very complex changes. So you can take these polysaccharides in a dietary supplement that literally is nothing more than just your cost, because in terms of your time and in terms of your effort compared to what you get out of them, again, it's a no-brainer. So
Mm.
I'm sorry, a very long-winded answer to tell you that this is my journey, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I will continue to do until I take my last breath.
Mm. Of course, diet, exercise, and I think the third most important pillar is sleep. Have to
Absolutely.
have great sleep. I know you drink a lot of water too, about a gallon a day. I drink a lot as well. So, doctor, I started my business in the 90s and I was working way too hard. I was putting my health in the back seat like many of us do in our 20s. We're starting a business and trying to get customers, etc. And got myself up to 340 pounds. I was
Wow.
a 46-inch waist.
Wow.
I'm currently, 195, 32-inch waist, and the doctor tells me if I don't lose the weight, I'm not going to see my daughter graduate. She's always had this frank relationship with me, which really worked well. And by the way, she would ask me what I ate. Many doctors don't today, and I know that's a very big topic of discussion. So I'm driving home, of course, punching the steering wheel, John, and say,
Mm.
I did this to myself. This is my pie hole. I'm going to get myself out of it. And it's just not me anymore. Me putting my health in the back seat just doesn't affect me. It affects this beautiful person that I've somehow brought into this world. And so now I had to look way past me. So I took the next 6, 7 months, lost about 130 pounds. And with weight loss, many people look at it as a finishing line. Okay, I did it. Now I can kind of go back. The crazy statistics, 90% gain the weight back. And so
That's
you
right.
can't make a temporary change. It's a life change. So people want a quick answer. right? How'd you do it? What's your secret? And of course, there's no secret. You and I both know that. But my quick answer is always discipline. That's how I lost it. I got focus, I got a routine, restraint, etc. And I continue to keep it off. Inside me to this very day, sometimes I could feel the 340-pound guy inside me wants to get out. And I want to overindulge because I love food. I'm an Italian background where they tend to overeat, but they eat well. But they just, they eat a lot. How does discipline play a role in your life, Dr. Johnny Lewis?
No, there's no question about it. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. You have to be disciplined and consistent every day. I'm exactly like you. I mean, I'm human. I can walk past a bakery or a
Mm,
ice cream shop and think, wait a minute, I wonder what that tastes like. Now, I will
mm,
tell you that I have people ask me, not all the time, but relatively frequently, well, don't you miss the taste of, a steak or a hamburger or something? Actually, I don't. In fact, if I'm at a restaurant where I smell meat cooking, it actually grosses me out. So
wow.
I'm way beyond like desiring to have animal food in my life again. But if it's, like something sweet or something, I probably have a tendency toward a sweet tooth. And I enjoy dark chocolate every day. But yeah, I mean, I'm exactly like you. I mean, I'm consistent with my routine. Again, unless I'm traveling, if I'm in an airplane, obviously you can't do too much activity or whatever. But actually, most of the time, I take my own food with me on the plane, so that way
Wow.
that I know if I'm hungry, I'm getting what I want, not being subjected to some garbage the airline is going to feed me. And then I'm just consistent. I mean, I power through it. I was worn out the last couple of days. I had to drive up to Orlando and then Daytona. We actually traded cars, and I drove that thing home. I got home at 2 a.m. Thursday morning, and I was completely worn out yesterday. And I had 3 other podcasts. But guess what? I still worked out. I still,
Mm,
I have that switch. Like, I'm not going to bed. No, I'm working out first. I'm
mm,
getting in my workout. So for me, it's just a part of who I am. And I would be a big hypocrite if I'm talking about health and wellness and nutrition and supplements and exercise. And then meanwhile, like, you gave the perfect example. If I was 340 pounds and I was up on a stage in front of a bunch of people talking, and they looked at me like that, and they'd say, well, this guy may sound smart, but he certainly doesn't practice what he
mm,
preaches. Why in the
mm,
world would I
mm,
believe anything he says?
mm.
Right. So face credibility or face validity is a very important concept. And I live this life, and my company, I mean, Dr. Lewis Nutrition, I put my own name on my company. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be sneaky or deceptive or slick or anything else. I'm putting my name on, what I'm doing. And me and my family, we all take daily brain care. I mean, I would not only be a hypocrite, but I would be missing out on an opportunity to enjoy the benefit of all of this research that I've conducted, showing how this product is so beneficial. And also, prevention is just as important as treatment. I mean, why in the world do you want to wait till you get something like you mean you got obese, but then you said, wait a minute, my daughter and my own health, I want to do something about this. So you took the situation into your own hands and you changed it. And I applaud you for it. That's very commendable. And so, taking these polysaccharides, just like eating well, like exercising every day, sleeping, as you mentioned, managing stress, not using tobacco. Why in the world would anybody smoke today? I have no idea.
Mm,
Alcohol, that's another debatable topic. I don't drink personally. I guess if you drink a little bit here and there, it's probably not the worst thing. Although some research suggests you really don't want to drink any if you want to avoid an increased risk of cancer. But I mean, these are just things that I do every single day, and I don't fall off the wagon. In fact, I don't even looking at it like a temptation. This is just who I am. I've been doing
mm,
this for so long now, Joe, that it's just who I am. It's my core. And so for me, like, somebody saying to me, "Oh, here, eat this steak," or "Here, eat this cheesecake," or "Here, drink this beer," or something. They those kinds of temptations don't even resonate with me. They don't even
mm,
appeal to me.
hmm. I like you when you say consistency is discipline. It's very true. Just be consistent. I was so excited when we set this up. There's got to be more conversations about just those kind of three essentials, right? Nutrition, exercise, and sleep. And along with
Absolutely.
nutrition, we could add water and supplements and what we put in our bodies, medicine, like you preach. It's very important, and we need to keep on having these conversations, especially in this country where there's such an issue, and it's just an inexpensive way to get healthy, right? And it's just
Right.
simple, and it doesn't take that much time. And you don't have to go to a high fancy gym. You can do lots of body weight exercises. You
That's
can
right.
walk. You can. There's just so many things, that people want to attribute. Well, I can't afford it, but there's just so many ways. I really appreciate your time today. So how can we get in touch with you, anybody that's listening?
Thank you, Joe, for having me. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And anytime you want to have me back on your show, I'm happy to come. But meanwhile, people can go to drlewisnutrition.com. That's Dr. No period, Lewis, Lewis, nutrition.com. That's a website that is just loaded with all sorts of information about the research, about daily brain care, the flagship product that originated out of all that Alzheimer's and multiple sclerosis work. By the way, I'd love to come back and talk research with you. I mean, we just barely scratched the surface on the research today, but go there. You can email us. You can give us a call. In fact, I welcome people that have questions, but there is so much information on our website. I think people could spend days there reading everything. And then, of course, under the Dr. Lewis Nutrition handle, we're on all the typical social media channels as well. But again, I'm very grateful and honored to be with you today. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to help anybody that I can, any way I can.
Very good. drlewisnutrition.com. You're on Facebook, Instagram, you have a Linktree, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. Thank you so much for your time. I hope next time I'm in the greater, Southern Florida area, maybe we'll get. Now, do you drink coffee?
You know what? I never acquired a taste for coffee.
Neither have I, by the way. I've never had a cup my whole life. Yeah.
I maybe had a couple of cups when I was a little kid with my grandparents, and I was like, ew, this stuff's so bitter. I just
never did.
Never acquired a taste for it.
Maybe a cold glass of water there on the beach. Doctor, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, buddy. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening and or viewing Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations. Please share this episode with one or two of your friends who you think may benefit from the episode. Our website, www.joeypinz.com. There you'll find lots of resources and you could join our mailing list. Please follow us on all our social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Podcast information, the video version of our podcast is on YouTube. Please subscribe. Audio is on all major podcasting platforms. Please follow them. And if you like it, please consider giving 5-star rating. Would really appreciate that. Thank you again for listening or watching Joey Pinz Discipline Conversations.